Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Wednesday, July 22nd, welcome, friends, on into the program. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. Today on the show, we're going to talk about cyclospora. You've heard about this parasite. It's all over the news. It causes some serious gastrointestinal distress. There has been a large outbreak all across the country, much of it concentrated in the upper Midwest. We'll tell you about why we think this is happening. And more generally, we're going to explore how safe our food supply is and if we could make it safer in this country, because that is really what this whole outbreak is bringing to light. So we'll ask you, what questions do you have about our food system and food safety in this country? And have you changed your food habits recently because of this outbreak or maybe another reason? Our number is 888-477-9499. Our email is studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can comment in the live chat.
Yeah, a lot of people may have questions. I know I stopped eating bag salads right now.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of
Understandably
concerns.
so.
And so we'd love to hear from you. 888-477-9499.
Was that a staple of your
Studio 2.
diet, by the way, bag salad?
Yeah, a couple times a week. You know,
Well,
make
that's
a big
lot.
salad. Yeah.
So you cut that out entirely.
Cut it out. Been cooking veggies for right now, just until things change.
Not getting the romaine.
Don't want anything explosive coming over here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
No, this is serious.
So this is serious.
This is a serious parasite, and so we'll get all your questions you have about this outbreak and the food system in general.
Just to protect the family for right now, but we'll see.
I get it.
We'll learn more. Studio2@whyy.org. It is Wednesday, so it's giveaway Wednesday.
It is giveaway Wednesday. That's a great point, Cherry. Every Wednesday this summer, we're giving out tickets to an upcoming event in the region. Stick around to the end of the show for the reveal of this week's giveaway Wednesday event and your chance to win. You got to stick around if you want to know what we're giving away.
And there have been some good giveaways. It's worth it.
I don't even know what it is this week.
I don't know. They don't tell us.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Well, we could. There is a document that we could look at now, but I didn't see it yet.
Yeah, we haven't seen it.
We haven't seen it, so we don't even know. But there's been some really good ones, and you have a chance to win some free tickets to something.
Yeah, so stick around for the show. We do have our trio of local news stories.
That's every day, not just Wednesday, folks.
Yeah, we have one today on this Wednesday. First story, pretty serious. There was a huge announcement out of New Jersey this week. Apparently more than 6,000 non-citizens were mistakenly registered to vote in the Garden State, and 400 of them actually voted in an election. New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill made the announcement Tuesday saying the mistake was caused by a glitch in software used by the state's Motor Vehicle Association back in 2023. Apparently, the software improperly auto-registered people who were getting their driver's license or ID between June of 2023 and June of 2024. It added them to the voter rolls in error, even though they had disclosed that they were not citizens. These individuals have since been removed from the voter rolls, and there is zero evidence that the 400 votes swayed any election in New Jersey. According to the New York Times, the error was discovered during Governor Phil Murphy's tenure, but was never disclosed publicly. Governor Mikey Sherrill says the software vendor used by the NBA was responsible for the error and is being phased out of use by New Jersey. But her administration, they just found out about the issue last week, and Sherrill did not hold back. She cited reckless failures by the Murphy administration. And this announcement has sent shockwaves across the country, and it adds fuels to claims by President Donald Trump and his allies that non-citizens are voting in elections nationwide. And I just want to be clear that there is little evidence of non-citizens voting in any widespread way.
Yeah, but the political ramifications of this could be severe. We don't know yet, but they could be severe. And I think it's also worth noting that this was all through auto registration.
Yes.
And so we don't have evidence here of people going out of their way to maliciously register as voters when they knew they were not eligible to vote. We have people who were auto registered erroneously.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important distinction, right? Because sometimes the characterizations of these are that, people who are undocumented or non-citizens are out there trying to influence elections. These were people that were probably surprised to find out they had been registered.
And then they got the registration and they were probably like, oh, I guess I can vote.
I'm eligible. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's an important distinction to make here, but it also calls into question the efficacy of those types of systems, these auto registration frameworks and structures that exist.
Yeah, because one glitch
states.
could have a ripple effect.
Yep.
And that's 6,600 people that were registered in just a year. So
and then it took years for it to come to light. And that's another part of this that's worth exploring further. And they're going to do some investigation and apparently issue some further analysis and comments at a later date.
Yeah, we'll be following
but what an odyssey it's been, Cherry.
Oh, okay.
It was a transition.
That was a nice. We tried.
We try from time to time with the transitions. Christopher Nolan seems to have hit a homer run with his film interpretation of the Odyssey, and the success of the star-studded movie has led to a huge spike in sales for Penn Classics professor Emily Wilson, who published a very buzzy translation of the Odyssey back in 2017, and that translation inspired some of the choices in Nolan's film. Publisher W.W. Norton told the Philly Voice that sales of Wilson's Odyssey translation are up 40% from last year.
All right.
And last year's sales were already up because they'd announced that the Odyssey was going to come out, made by Nolan. Wilson's translation got a lot of attention even back at the time in 2017, and some criticism as well, because it uses a relatively modern words and syntax, and those kinds of choices seem to have made a strong impression on Nolan, who transferred some of those into the film itself. Now, interestingly, this professor, Emily Wilson, has been a little critical, actually, of Nolan's Odyssey.
What?
She has.
Okay.
She said to the AP, quote, "I want to celebrate the fact that so many more people are aware of the Odyssey and were brought back to the poem, but at the same time, I had the sense that Christopher Nolan was trying to pack everything in while missing themes that were essential to the poem." So you saw the Odyssey, Cherry.
I did.
I have not. Did the language in the film strike you as particularly modern, not too old-fashioned-y?
Well, I think it's about accessibility and bringing something, that's ancient to modern times. I thought the film was amazing. The cinematography, the acting, the sound design, amazing. It was 3 hours, but it honestly did not feel like 3 hours.
It's 3 hours long?
3 hours
I'm
long.
out.
It's long. But I will say this, for people who know the full story of the Odyssey, and a lot of people do, you studied it, they did leave out some major things, and they did cram a lot into that 3 hours. I mean, you could make a 5-part Odyssey film. Easy.
The book's a bit of an odyssey.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odyssey, and they left out like the intervention by the gods, all sorts of things. But I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it, and I recommend it. So
I recommend "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is a Coen Brothers film based on the Odyssey. That is legitimately one of my favorite movies, and one of the few movies I will sit down and watch anytime.
How long was that one?
But I can look at Google it right now. "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." It's not 3 hours, but it's pretty long.
Yeah.
Have you not seen it?
I think I have seen it, but I don't remember.
It's like on TBS all the time. You should absolutely watch it.
It's one of those late night watches.
Awesome. It's awesome. Whatever. We don't have time to get into "Oh Brother," but George Clooney really does a good job in that film, and John Turturro's in it. Should I just do a whole spiel now on "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou"? Do we have time for that? Okay, no, we don't. Okay, we have to move on. Got it.
But third story, to my fellow thrifters, let me tell you how a kid in Oregon flipped a $3 find into 90 grand. Okay, this is a big story. 19-year-old Quinn Brown, he stumbled upon an old Lakers warm-up jacket at a Goodwill bin just outside of Portland. Okay, it just so happened it had the name Chamberlain on the back. Y'all catching up? He bought said jacket for $3. But Brown, smart kid, been selling clothing online for years. He knew Philly native Wilt Chamberlain was a legend, so he did some research. He also knew that Wilt was 7'1", so he measured the jacket and realized, oh my God,
this is a big jacket.
This is a big jacket. Okay. Then he matched the Lakers patch on the front to photos he found online. He put the photo of the warm up on social media, and bam, Sotheby's, the auction house, reached out. Okay, turns out the warm-up jacket was the actual one Wilt Chamberlain wore at the 1972 NBA Finals, Knicks versus Lakers, where the Lakers won and Wilt Chamberlain was named MVP, most valuable player. Okay, long story short, they auctioned off the warm-up jacket, and after 48 bids, sold it for just under $90,000. Wilt Chamberlain blessing the next generation from the grave. Look at that.
I guess he is. This is such a dangerous story, Cherry, because now all the people who already thrift too much
gonna be all of it.
There's gold in these crates, everyone's gonna be digging through. But this is the kind of stupid stuff I'd be spending money on if I had too much of it, by the way.
$3,
It's a very
dude.
cool jacket.
And he said that I saw in the CBS, he said the jacket came down below his knees. So he put
So
it
that's how
on.
you knew it belonged
He
to
was
Will.
like, yo, this is something. Yeah.
I also just, speaking of the Odyssey, really, I feel like Wilt is one of the few athletes that feels more like a demigod. Like he has such a mystique to him.
Yeah,
And his
just so
accomplishments are so
tall.
bigger than life.
Yeah,
That
I
I would
mean,
like to have his jacket.
And every
And by
aspect
the
of
way,
life,
I believe
yeah.
he has been in this studio.
I heard with Marty
on radio
Masco,
tape.
right?
So
yeah.
maybe we should sell these, I don't know, chairs or something.
Something.
Wilt might have sat in these chairs. We don't know. But Sotheby's, if you could reach out, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll be right back on Studio 2.
Welcome back to Studio 2 here on WHYY. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. The cyclospora outbreak is one of the largest in U.S. history. The CDC has linked more than 4,000 infections to the microscopic parasite, which causes horrible and lingering gastrointestinal distress.
Yeah, and because symptoms can turn up weeks after someone ingests the parasite, it's hard for officials to trace the source. In a press conference yesterday, Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., explained where the investigation into the outbreak stands.
We do have the outbreak under control. We have done extensive forensics, epidemiological forensics, and we've identified the source of the outbreak. We and the companies that have been involved have implemented a recall.
But this all raises questions again about our food supply safety and why foodborne illnesses keep happening. An estimated 48 million Americans get sick each year, Cherry.
Yeah, so today, can we make our food system safer, and what steps can consumers take to protect themselves at home? With us to talk about all of this, we have Donald Schaffner, a distinguished professor and an extension specialist in food science at Rutgers University. Don, welcome to Studio 2.
Hey, pleasure to be here, guys.
We also have Timothy Litton, professor of law at Georgia State University and the author of Outbreak, Foodborne Illness, and the Struggle for Food Safety. Tim, welcome to Studio 2.
Nice to be here.
And nice to have you listening at home as well. We'd like to know, what questions do you have about our food system? And have you changed your food habits recently because of this outbreak or any other reason? Our number is 888-477-9499. Our email is studio2@whyy.org. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, how you doing? Drop a comment in the chat.
Don Schaffner, I want to start with you, and I would love for you to give us some basic understanding. Can you tell us what is cyclospora and why it's been so hard to investigate it?
Sure. So there's three classes of organisms that make us sick: viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Cyclospora is in that last category of parasites. And Part of the reason why, and you alluded to it in your opening comments, part of the reason why this organism is so tough to manage is the incubation period is rather long. So the incubation period for things like Salmonella and E. coli, 24, 48, 72 hours, and then you're probably going to be sick if you're exposed. With respect to cyclospora, that incubation period ranges from 2 days to up to 14 days. So a longer incubation period. Also, the tests that we need to find the organism in someone's feces are much more complicated and not nearly as state of the art as the techniques we have for salmonella. So even after you've eaten the food and you've gotten sick and you've gone to the doctor, it may take a week or more to get and this test for cyclospora, they're not the regular tests that we do for parasites. This is a special test just for cyclospora, and so that can take some time to do. And so by the time after somebody eats the food till they get sick, till they go to a doctor, till they get the test results, it might be 3 or 4 weeks have gone by. And I don't know about you guys, but I can barely remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, much less what I ate 4 weeks ago. And so at this point in the investigation, or at that point in the investigation, really what we're looking for is a statistical signal that says, okay, people that ate something in Michigan 4 weeks ago, what were they likely to eat more often than not? And then we use that epidemiology, that statistical evidence to go and begin to do the traceback investigation.
I think I had cereal yesterday morning,
I
but
know,
I'm actually
I
not
could
sure
barely
about
remember.
that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there, Don, that the tests are very specific for this type of parasite, and it seemed like you were saying maybe not as sophisticated. Is that because we just haven't invested in better tests, or is there something about this parasite that makes it hard to test for?
Sure. Well, one thing to remember about viruses and parasites is they don't grow outside the host. Salmonella and E. coli, those you can grow outside the host. We can go down to my laboratory at Rutgers. You can give me 1 cell of salmonella and come back the next day, and I've got millions of cells of salmonella. I can't do that for cyclospora. The only way for me to make more cyclospora for you would be for me to eat it and then wait for the diarrhea.
Yeah,
so I don't
not going to do
recommend
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we cannot culture these things in the laboratory, which means that we have to use molecular-based tests, PCR-based tests, polymerase chain reaction tests, and sometimes those can mislead us. We can talk maybe at some point about the false positive that FDA, they said it was a positive, then they said it was a false positive. That has something to do with the tests. The other thing is that for things like Salmonella and E. coli, we have very sophisticated whole genome sequencing techniques, which basically says, Cherry, if you're sick with a strain of salmonella and I'm sick with a strain of salmonella, we can run the sequence on those and we can determine whether we're sick from exactly the same strain of salmonella or not. With cyclospora, we have typing techniques, but they're not as finely grained and don't have as high a resolution. And so it's more difficult to match people that might have been exposed to the same source because our ability to match those strains is just not as fine.
It almost feels like at a crime scene not having DNA evidence or something like that. It's just we don't have the exact sort of fine-tuned.
Yeah.
DNA's been degraded by somebody throwing chlorine around or something. Exactly right.
And
exactly
so
right.
I want to bring Tim into the conversation because, Tim, we hear about the cyclospora. It takes weeks to really figure out who's got it and then to test it. And some people go to the hospital, some people don't. So how does something like this parasite end up in our food?
That's the question everybody's asking. There's really only one source, as Don mentioned, of this parasite, and that's from human fecal matter. So it must be some point in the supply chain between the field and the kitchen table that the food has come into contact with human fecal matter. And the most likely candidates for this that we've seen in previous outbreaks are either some sort of irrigation water or water that's flooded onto growing fields that's been infected with sewage, or an outhouse that's leaking, or something that is giving off human feces, or worker sanitation, people who are working with the produce either in the fields or during the course of production who haven't washed their hands and who have cyclospora. This is unlike a lot of other diseases that are often associated, for example, with runoff from large cattle feeding operations, or animal intrusion, or birds pooping in the field. What we're talking about here is something that, as far as we know, only is passed through human fecal matter. So we're talking about something that's either a sewage problem or some sort of runoff problem or some sort of worker sanitation problem. The current traceback suggests that the culprit might be a farm in Mexico. And so it might be the case that the farm in Mexico doesn't have the same sorts of controls systems around overflow or sanitation in the surrounding properties or worker hygiene that we would expect normally from growing fields in places like California and Arizona.
Of course, this raises a stomach-churning larger question, Tim, which is it relatively common for human fecal matter to come into contact with food? Because I assume not all human fecal matter has this parasite in it. We're only zeroing in on this potential link because of the presence of the parasite. Is there non-parasitic human fecal matter frequently coming into contact with produce in the supply chain? Do we know that or not know that, Tim?
Well, one of the things that's quite difficult to wrap your brain around when you talk about food safety, especially on farms, is it turns out that it's devilishly difficult to figure out just how clean the water is. So if you are a farmer, you want to irrigate your crops, the one option that's not available to you is municipal water. You can't just take water out of the tap and irrigate thousands of acres of lettuce fields. So
and why is that, real quick? I just want to make sure we understand that. Why is that?
It would be far too expensive. We'd need a huge amount of municipal water that's treated in order to cover vast amounts of territory to irrigate crops in California, Arizona, or places like Mexico. And so we need to look for natural sources of water. Those might be irrigation canals. Those might be well water. Those might be nearby rivers. There are a variety of different places we could draw that water from. And all of those places are subject to possible contamination. As I mentioned, fresh produce is a particular problem because it's grown outside. So it's exposed to the elements. It's exposed to animals that might be around it, exposed to birds. And it also may be exposed to runoff or contaminated water that is contaminated by other sources, either by animals or cattle feeding operations. And so it's probably the case in many cases that when we have outbreaks, there's been some sort of contamination event. It is often traced back to the fields. Our problem is that if we start at the front end and say, okay, well, let's clean up the water, the first thing we need to know is how clean is the water that we're using on the fields. And the problem is that's extremely difficult to measure. It's a little like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's hard to know how much water to measure, how big the samples need to be. It's hard to know what pathogens to test for. And all of this costs money. So it's hard to know how to create an affordable mechanism.
Just to follow up quickly on this, you said it's very hard to know, but can one make a blanket statement saying that the tap water that I get to fill up my water bottle is cleaner or less clean than the average drop of water that goes to watering the average field somewhere in America, or let's say Mexico as well? I'll put that to you, Don. Can we say that the water used for produce is cleaner or less clean on the whole?
I would say it's managed differently, and yes, it may be different. But another really important point to realize with respect to this outbreak and others, and Tim alluded to it a little bit with the difficulties of testing, realize that most municipal water and most irrigation water is perfectly fine and free of contaminants. And so the problem is you have to get a sample that has the organism, and then you have to have a reliable test that works to detect the organism. And the problem is that you can't test 100% of the water, because then you have 0% of the water left to water the crop. But 100% of the crop more or less gets eaten by people. And so the problem is we're trying to manage something, but we have, let's say, a limited ability to resolve the problem. There's another point too that I want to introduce into the discussion before we get too far downstream, not to make a water joke, and that is the idea that definitively what is going on in the United States right now are multiple cyclospora outbreaks. If you go on to FDA's website, you'll see, I looked at it just today, I believe there's 4 outbreaks that FDA lists on their website. One started in June. They've declared that outbreak over and they never identified a cause. There's 3 other cyclospora outbreaks that are ongoing right now. One is the one that we've been talking about that's centered in Michigan and Ohio. And in that particular case, the epidemiology has implicated a product, but there's still 2 other outbreaks that don't have causes. And I'm also wondering if there's not something else going on in Michigan that may be driving a large number of those cases. We know that we have thousands of cases in Michigan and Ohio right now. What we don't know definitively is, were all of those thousands of people exposed to Taco Bell lettuce? The number of people that have actually been interviewed by epidemiologists lettuce and linked to Taco Bell lettuce is not all of those cases. And the other thing I want to point out is that, and Tim mentioned it before, and I think I mentioned it as well too, is that this organism spreads from person to person, but probably not by direct contact, because when you excrete the oocysts, they're not immediately infectious, right? And then it takes some time. But also another source, in addition to all the foods that have been implicated in outbreaks in the past, water is also a potential source. And so if we have exposure to contaminated water, independent of agriculture, contaminated water, that water could also result in illnesses. And so there's a lot going on right now, and we're focused on Michigan and Ohio, but there might even be multiple things going on there.
Yeah, it sounds like go ahead.
I wonder if we could go back to water for just a minute. There's an additional problem here that we haven't talked about, which is we have one problem, which is we don't know how clean the water actually is that we're putting on crops, because as Don mentioned, we have a sampling problem. It's difficult to measure this, and science has not come up with a reliable way to get consistent measurements about how clean water is that we're putting on crops. But the second problem is we don't know how clean the water needs to be.
Yeah.
That is, it's very possible we don't need 100% pure water like we get out of the tap, because of course you can get exposed to microbial pathogens all the time. People get exposed to colds. You don't necessarily get them. It depends just how much of the pathogen is on the food. And that depends on how much needs to be in the water in order to actually make the food unsafe to people. And what we don't know, and science can't tell us, is what are the transfer rates of pathogens that are in the water onto different kinds of crops? That may vary. What's the survival rate of the pathogens? How long they last in the field before they're harvested? What kind of treatment or sanitation does the produce undergo during the course of production that might reduce microbial loads? And furthermore, how much of the parasite is going to make me as a particular individual sick? That's going to depend on how much of it I eat, how healthy I am. Am I immunosuppressed? Am I on chemotherapy? Am I younger? So we don't have a reliable measure for how clean we want the water to be. Not only do we not know how clean it is, we don't know how clean it needs to be.
Yeah. And let me just reiterate our questions for today to our listeners. Our questions, what questions do you have about our food system? And did you change your food habits recently when you heard about this outbreak? You can give us a call, 888-477-9499, email studio2@whyy.org. And for our Facebook and YouTube listeners, you can leave your comments in the chat. Citizen Dave on Facebook says, I am not eating out at this moment and holding off purchasing food associated with it. Thomasina says, I haven't bought berries, lettuce, or grapes since it has been announced. And so I want to zoom out a little bit, Tim, because I want to sort of get an understanding about the food system, because, you know, who's checking the water? You talk about water checks and you can't determine this, and because you can't check all the water, you're doing sampling like Don talked about. But who is responsible for doing these water checks, for going to different farms, for checking on the produce, just to make sure, doing some spot checks? Is it the government? Is it someone else? Who does that to make sure that there's a certain level of, a standard level of quality of the food that we get when we go to the grocery store or elsewhere? Tim?
That's a great question. I think most people, when they think about food safety, think about a regulatory system that is run by government agencies, whether that's the FDA or the CDC or the USDA or state public health authorities. And the fact of the matter is that while the federal government does most of the work, and the states as well, government does most of the work when it comes to tracking disease, determining whether there has been an outbreak and then investigating where it might come from, the actual day-to-day work of inspection to make sure that people are using clean practices on farms or processing equipment is not a government function by and large in most parts of the industry, and certainly not in fresh produce. The vast majority of the inspection that's being conducted is being conducted by private food safety certifiers or by state certifiers who are paid by private industry. And so private industry is really in charge of the whole inspection system. And I think that's something that people don't generally appreciate. And the way this works is that, for example, in leafy greens, the trade associations in leafy greens in California and Arizona put together standards largely based on government regulation, but also sometimes stricter. And they require that all of the people who are part of the trade association who sell their produce, if they want to be part of the association and get a seal of approval, have to make sure that all of the growers that they buy from before they sell to grocery stores have undergone private food safety audits or food safety audits done by California inspectors who are paid for by industry. And they're using the standards that the trade association has put together, called the Leafy Greens Marketing Agreement. And so when we think about, inspections, since 1934, the FDA has had responsibility for food safety on every single of the 120,000 American farms that grow fresh produce, but it has zero budget in order to do that. And as a result, the FDA does not do any routine inspections of farms anywhere in the United States unless there's an outbreak when they go to investigate it.
And that's
all of that work is being done by private food safety certifiers and state certifiers paid for by private industry.
Thank you for that. And Don, my follow-up question to you, when hearing a lot of people probably, this was very shocking to me. I did not know that. I think a lot of people did not know that.
They police themselves, essentially.
They basically police themselves. And when you think about that, Don, do you see gaps that could have led to this type of outbreak and other outbreaks that we may never even hear about?
Yeah, policing themselves, that kind of has some negative connotations. What I will say is I work with folks that work for regulatory agencies. I work with people in academia and also people in the industry. And the industry food safety people I know take their jobs very seriously. So it's again, I think self-policing can be a little bit, alarming for people to hear, and I don't think it's quite like that. What I will say too is that certainly there's a great reason for people like Taco Bell and Taylor Farms to not cause outbreaks, which is that it's brand reputation. And so Taylor Farms is a big player in the space, and I think they care very much about food safety, and they want to do the right thing. And it's self-policing, but these are good, hardworking people that eat the food that they produce, right? So they want it to be safe so they can feed it to their families as well.
So, and then there's also the recall process, and it's called a voluntary recall. So why is it called that, Don? And could a company just refuse to do it? Do they ever refuse to do it? Taylor Farms did the recall, so I'm not calling them out. I'm just the way the whole system works. Like if someone identifies a problem, the FDA, the federal government somehow identifies a problem, how does that lead to a recall? And can the company say no?
Yeah, so in many cases, it is a voluntary recall, and the company could say no. One of the changes under the Food Safety Modernization Act, and Tim's the lawyer, he can talk maybe more about this, but that we made it so that FDA has mandatory recall authority. But I can tell you that in most cases, the agency would really like for the company just to step up and do it and do the voluntary recall. So yeah, again, like policing yourself and voluntary recall, those are terms that we might perceive as being a little bit loaded. But again, the companies are doing what they need to do to make sure that things are safe. In fact, Taco Bell even pulled lettuce even before it was publicly known about Taylor Farms. Taco Bell just made the decision to pull lettuce from its menus based on what it wanted to do to protect its customers.
Yeah. Let's read a couple.
I wonder.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
Also, I think a lot of people have expressed concern about the idea that the government and industry aren't really doing enough. And Don has, I think, provided and vouched for a lot of the integrity in the industry. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there are really three kinds of narratives or stories people tell themselves about how the system works or does not work and why it's not working well. One of those stories is a story of what I would call regulatory capture. The idea that consumer advocates often talk about the growing, the agriculture industry is very powerful. They work very hard. They often lobby against stricter controls. And they have a lot of influence in Washington. We know that Taylor Farms, many people have pointed out, is a donor to the MAGA campaign. And I think a lot of people are concerned that industry has put too much pressure on the regulators not to be tough enough on industry. And that's sort of one of the stories people tell themselves about regulatory capture. The second story is a story about big government. And you'll hear people in industry often complaining that, we just don't have the science in order to solve a lot of these problems. And when something goes wrong, the first thing the government does is throw industry under the bus. And that's what we see here with the false positive out of Mexico and Taylor Farms. The FDA jumped the gun here because they were eager to find a culprit, and they basically named Taylor Farms, and Taylor Farms is still part of the investigation, but that was a false positive, and FDA made too much out of it. And so industry often thinks that there's overreach by government, or we have too much government interference here, and the government's too heavy-handed. The third narrative is the one that you hear agency officials talk about, which is what I would call inadequate resources. They are charged by Congress with policing the entire food system and inspecting 120,000 American farms. And the fact is they don't have any of the resources necessary to do this. And every day they find themselves under greater pressure. And so you can tell them that they have to basically do a better job, but if you don't give them the money, there's no way to do it. And what I would suggest that between these three narratives about regulatory capture in big business, government overreach and sort of big government and throwing industry under the bus, and the idea that the government has this huge mandate but not enough resources to carry it out. I think there's more than enough evidence to suggest that there's a little bit of truth in each of these perspectives, and that we probably need to keep them all in mind when we think about how the system malfunctions.
Yeah, let me read a couple comments because we're about to go on a break. Groundskeeper says, we usually watch the news and we were surprised to see that we actually had some salads in our fridge from Taylor Farms that were possibly contaminated. So we threw them out and are being more careful. Thanks to my wife for paying attention to what food she bought. Gloria from Mount Airy says, I buy produce from my local food co-op or farmers markets instead of big corporations. My co-op vets local sources. So
always listen to your wife. It's really the moral of that story.
And I'm a wife, so yes, you hear that? Listen.
I'm playing to my audience here. I know what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And so on the other side of this break, we're going to talk more about this issue because this outbreak arrives amid debates over reductions in federal food safety programs. So we'll talk about that. We'd love to hear from you. Again, 888-477-9499. Studio 2 will be right back.
And welcome back to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Before we jump back into our conversation about food safety, it is time to reveal today's Giveaway Wednesday event. Hit it, Diana.
Caught in the light, blinded by hunger, and fed to the night. Darling.
And that is the folk duo Watch House, and I'm going to shock all of you. I have actually seen them live.
Wow.
They used to be called Mandolin Orange, and then they changed their name. I'm not sure why, but they're great.
You're an OG fan.
They're great. They are really awesome. I think I saw them at Union Transfer. Anyways, they'll be performing Saturday, August 8th in King of Prussia as part of the Concerts Under the Stars series.
Yes, 2 tickets to the show will run you $100, but the second person who emails studio2@whyy.org and asks for a pair of tickets will get them free, courtesy of Studio 2. Again, the second person who emails studio2@whyy.org, you got to ask for the tickets, and they'll be yours.
Now let's get back to the cyclospora outbreak that has sickened thousands of people across the country. Officials have linked some of the cases to shredded iceberg lettuce from Taylor Farms, which has issued a recall.
Yeah, we're also discussing why foodborne illness is so common and if there are ways to make our food supply safer. Let me reintroduce our guests. We have Timothy Lighton, professor of law at Georgia State University and the author of Outbreak, Foodborne Illness and the Struggle for Food Safety. We also have Donald Schaffner, distinguished professor and extension specialist in food science at Rutgers University.
And we'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have about our food system? Have you changed your food habits recently? Our number is 888-477-9499. You can also email studio2@whyy.org. Here's a comment from Jared in Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay, hello, Jared in Raleigh, North Carolina. How much worse is this than other foodborne illnesses? Is this truly abnormal and or a timely media story to feed the news funnel? Jared's recommendation is to buy local and wash always. Stop supporting a food system based on profit, greed, and big food corporations. That's Jared's take. And we heard on the other side of this break someone mentioning the same idea of buying local as an antidote. I am curious, is there evidence that buying locally grown produce is less likely to make you sick, Tim Litton? I mean, is that because at the end of the day, these are pretty rare events, right? So I imagine if you're producing 1 million tons of lettuce, you're more likely to have some sort of issue with it than if you're producing 1 ton of lettuce. That's just statistics. But there also might be something about the process of locally grown food that's different. So could you sort through that for us, Tim?
Yeah, I'm not convinced at all. It's very possible, and I don't think there's good evidence to suggest that big growers are more susceptible to contamination than smaller growers. They've done studies in California farmers markets with local produce, and they have found more than enough pathogens associated with the produce on the produce. Small farmers may actually not have the kind of wherewithal in order to shield their crops from water the way that larger producers might. If you have to have a margin around your field to protect it, it might be harder for a small farmer. Small farmers might have more of an organic model where they have more animals around the farm, and they have a sort of more integrated model, more holistic model. That carries with it its own food safety risks. That's not true in sort of more agribusiness. And so there are risks associated with both, and I'm not sure that you can immunize yourself from the risks by buying local produce. A lot of it depends on what you know about the grower, and there's nothing inherent about local or small production that makes it more protected than agribusiness.
Yeah, so interesting. Let's bring in a caller. We have Mary from Philadelphia on the line. Mary, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi. A few years ago, I don't recall how many years, I remember reading about contamination of produce on a farm in California. They were drawing their water from the same river, and I don't remember which river, I'm sorry, but a few miles upstream from their farm, there was a place where livestock was being raised, and of course it was right along this river. And it was eventually found out that the water being drawn from this river was contaminated with waste from the livestock, and it was being sprayed on the produce, and that was the source of the contamination. And I'm wondering if either of your guests know if California has instituted new regulations mandating that a certain number of miles be kept between areas where livestock are being grown and produce is being grown.
Thank you, Mary from Philadelphia. That's a great question. I see you nodding your head, Tim, so I'm going to pitch this to you, your response to Mary's question.
Sure, this is a common problem. It occurs both in Arizona and in California. We've seen this in outbreaks, primarily in romaine lettuce. There are others as well, but the most famous ones are romaine lettuce, so you may be referring to one of those cases. What happens is that cattle feeding operations, which are relatively large operations that often produce an enormous amount of waste, store a lot of that waste in lagoons. Some of that waste finds its way out of the cattle feeding operations into water sources, whether that be rivers or irrigation canals. And in a number of cases, CDC and FDA investigators have traced back outbreaks associated with leafy greens to contaminated water, and the source of that contamination appears to be from cattle feeding operations. The response to that has been primarily an industry response, and the industry responding is the leafy greens industry, which has created stricter standards for creating margins around fields to make sure that there's no water infiltration, and stricter testing standards. But as we mentioned before, it's not clear that it's easy to come up with testing standards that are more reliable. So if you make them stricter, it doesn't necessarily mitigate the risk. And so what we have this permanent problem where we have two activities essential to the food system. One is agriculture and fresh produce, and the other is cattle raising, and they don't really mix and they don't go together. And it turns out that cattle ranchers don't really want to move their operations. They're perfectly happy where they are. There have been a lot of conversations between the fresh produce industry, in particular the leafy greens industry, and cattle operators in California that's been sort of hosted by Davis and the trade associations to try and work out an agreement. We have not seen progress. And so one of the things that I have advocated is I think it's time to get a little bit tougher on the beef industry. And the way to do that is to get their attention. And the best way to get the attention of a powerful industry in the United States is to sue them. So how might you do that? You can sue them for nuisance, because dumping waste or letting waste leak off of your property to contaminate irrigation water is a nuisance, and you can be liable for that. And if you're liable for that, all of a sudden it costs you money, and you might start to think about immunizing your cows or moving your operation. We haven't gotten there yet because there aren't plaintiffs who want to bring that lawsuit. But I think the more that the leafy greens industry finds itself being blamed for all of these outbreaks, and the more these outbreaks are really coming from cattle operations, it will start to think more seriously about perhaps using the same kind of litigation strategy we've used to bring tobacco or opioids or other industries under control.
Yeah, and I want to read this comment from Jane on Facebook who says, I am very concerned about food safety now that the current administration has dismantled the agencies and programs responsible for assuring that our food is safe. And so thank you for that, Tim, and thank you for that, Jean, on Facebook, because I wanted to shift gears because we have about 10 minutes left in the show. And I wanted to sort of separate politics from science, and because we're talking about this outbreak at a political moment, right? And it comes around debate over reductions in federal food safety programs, surveillance systems, staffing. And some have argued that these changes have weakened America's ability to detect outbreaks quickly. And they've also talked about the cyclospora and how it has challenged investigators for decades. But in this moment, it makes it even harder to detect. And so I want to ask you, Don, did some of the federal cuts that we've seen to HHS, did it affect this outbreak?
Well, certainly these cuts are bad. One of the changes that was announced was CDC was going to discontinue cyclospora from its FoodNet program, from mandatory cyclospora reporting. Now, that doesn't deal with outbreaks because it's CDC's not a regulatory agency, it's an investigative public health agency. But what that means is that we're going to have less data potentially about cyclospora, which we desperately need right now. You mentioned HHS, but also USDA, Ag Research Service, which is where a lot of our agricultural research expertise resides. They have a facility in Beltsville, Maryland that's being closed. This is the biggest concentration of USDA parasitology researchers we have in the country. And that facility is being closed, and those people are being asked to move halfway across the country, which they're probably not going to do because they have kids and spouses, in Beltsville. So, the general chaos in Washington and the general disruption and the lack of job security for federal employees, none of that is good. I don't think we can point to any of it and say that caused the outbreak, but it's just not good. We should be investing more resources in research and in epidemiology and in enforcement to deal with these situations. So we need government. I mean, Tim made some really nice points about big government, but I think we agree that we need government to help us with things like this, and it's not the time to be cutting resources.
Big picture, because I want to leave some time at the end for people to get some practical tips about what they can do as they hear all these scary headlines. But big picture, what are some things we could do to improve food safety, and what trade-offs would that entail? Because at the end of the day, a lot of folks, frankly, they want to have berries in the winter. They want to be able to pick up a bag of lettuce whenever at their local supermarket. And in order to do that, you've got to have lots of produce produced probably far away from your home and shipped to you. So if that's what people want, how do we make that system safer, Tim? Or is there a way to make it safer?
Yeah, I would say there are no quick fixes here. I mean, fresh produce became a food safety hotspot in the late 1990s when there seemed to be an uptick, and it hasn't abated since, in outbreaks associated with fresh produce. And I think this is the kind of thing that you have to think in terms of the long game. I completely agree with Don. This is a problem that predated the current administration. It's not the current administration's fault per se, but all of these cuts and the degradation of science and the surveillance system are not helping. They're actually moving us in the wrong direction. And I think what we need to do really is three things. The first thing we need to do is we need to invest more money in public health surveillance. And that's really a government job. Only the government is well suited to keep track of what's going on across a state or around the country. Only the federal government and the state governments really have the capacity to do that work. And we need to know how many people are getting sick, and we need to be able to trace these illnesses quickly and pull food off the shelves. And in order to do that, we need more government investment in surveillance and oversight. On the other hand, when it comes to inspection, we're never going to have enough money for the government to carry out routine inspections. So what we need to do is strengthen the industry's efforts to try and create a more reliable private system of inspection. And one way to do that is to use things like the Leafy Greens marketing agreement in California as a model. That's a model where an industry association has really tried to buckle down to make sure that its members are serious about food safety and that they save these kinds of scandals from appearing as often. It's really going to tank the industry if they don't. And we need to make sure that we are supporting those kinds of efforts. And the third thing is really research and development. We need more science. We need better science. And that's really a partnership between the federal government, which provides a lot of funding for science, important funding and vital funding, and also industry, which provides a lot of money for funding. And on the one hand, what we see right now is this sort of reckless push for government efficiency, stripping out a lot of science from the federal government. And the second thing we see is we see a war and a tariff policy that is increasing costs for fertilizer and fuels for the industry, which makes it harder for the industry to fund its own research. And so at the time when we need more scientific research, we're getting stress from both government sources and industry sources for funding that research.
Yeah. And so thank you for that, Tim. And so we have a bunch of questions from Dandelion, Look a Bear, Judith, a lot of folks writing in. And so, Don, I wanted for you to give some people some practical tips, because folks are wondering, they've have been avoiding raw food. They've been eating from local, and they've been cooking their vegetables. Can you tell us the steps that people can take to make sure that they don't get this parasite? And can they wash things? Do they cook things? What should they be doing?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm certainly people are free to do what they want. I do want to share what I've been doing. I have not changed my diet one bit. I've been eating fresh salad every night this week. I'm going to have fresh salad again tonight because I'm confident that the salad that I'm getting is not associated with any of these outbreaks. I've seen advice that people should wash their hands. I think it's great. Everybody should wash their hands, but don't wash your hands and think that it's going to stop you from getting cyclospora. Just like washing your hands is great during COVID, but it's not going to stop you from getting COVID, because that's not how we get COVID. I would also say that I've heard recommendations about washing and different ways to wash. Pretty much washing is not a very effective intervention for any pathogen, Salmonella, E. coli, or cyclospora. So don't think that washing is going to help you. What will help you is cooking. And so if you are concerned and you want to maintain your consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, I would say, put those into cooked dishes. And that's going to be a way to keep yourself safe. And the other thing I would say, just like the one listener reported, they checked their fridge and they found some Taylor Farms product in their fridge. So pay attention to what products have been recalled, and then check your fridge. And if you have that product, get rid of it.
I have just about a minute left, but I also wanted to give you, Don, a chance to maybe give us a couple of fixes for the future to make the food system safer. Real quick, a couple things you think we could do that would make the recurrence of something like this less likely.
Yeah, well, I think certainly we need resources for CDC. That's not going to prevent problems in the future, but it's going to enable us to learn about problems right now. And what we learn now may help us in the future. And then, again, appropriate government funding for research, fund the USDA ARS, provide money for academic researchers who are working on filtration technologies and detection technologies, and then adequate resources for FDA so they have enough boots on the ground to go out and do these traceback investigations.
That is the final word from Don Schaffner, Distinguished Professor and Extension Specialist in Food Science at Rutgers University. Don, thanks for joining us today on Studio 2.
Pleasure to be here, guys. Thanks.
And let me also thank Tim Litton, Professor of Law at Georgia State University and the author of Outbreak, Foodborne Illness and the Struggle for Food Safety. Tim, appreciated your time today on the show.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who called and wrote in with all your questions and who watched on Facebook and YouTube. And sorry, Phyllis from Ardmore, we did not get to you. Hopefully you'll listen tomorrow and call again another day. Thanks, of course, to our producers, Debbie Builder, Hazel May Bryan, Ben Abrams, and Paige Murray Bessler. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Tina Calicay and Diana Martinez engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. From Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
Coming up tomorrow on the show, when was the last time you knocked on a neighbor's door? Yeah, research shows we're spending less time with the people living closest to us thanks to technology, changing communities, and just busier lives.
But put on your Mr. Rogers cardigan, folks, because there are still so many ways to be a great neighbor. From the city block to the suburban cul-de-sac, join us for the ultimate guide to being a better neighbor no matter where you live. That's noon tomorrow on Studio 2, but up next on WHYY, it's Here and Now.